Step back. Don't touch anything. The words land as the light catches the badge on his chest. His hands stay visible at his sides. The answer comes out measured. Practiced. Exactly what the moment calls for. It doesn't register. The gaze skips past the uniform, past the placard clipped at the belt. I don't care what costume you're wearing. Stay right there. The sidewalk outside the terminal is already crowded. Luggage wheels cutting uneven lines through the noise. Marcus Hill comes from the law enforcement parking zone, through the same doors he's used for years. Moving with purpose but not running. The placard is still visible on the dashboard behind him through the glass. He checks the time once, then lets his wrist fall back to his side. A body shifts into his path. Not a question. A stop. Hold it. He stops. Hands settle at his sides. Fingers loose. The response is immediate and procedural as to where he's going. Why? Who's he here to meet? The words are clean. No extra. He angles his chest slightly, to enough for the patches to be obvious without pushing them forward. Officer Tyler Reynolds doesn't move. The eyes don't drop to the badge. Anyone can buy patches online. A short breath leaves his nose. He repeats the destination. Adds the gate number this time. Then the roll. He adds the gate number again. Slower. It still doesn't land. The finger comes up. Not pointing outward. Tapping once. Lightly. Right against the metal pinned to his chest. Not hard enough to shove. Hard enough to register. This doesn't impress me. He takes half a step back, then corrects it, returning to the same spot. His hands come up again. Slower this time. Palms visible. The movement is careful, almost exaggerated. Around them, people adjust their paths without stopping. Shoulders turning. Bags pulling close. I'm on duty. The reply is a laugh that cuts short, like it wasn't meant to be shared. You're moving weird. He looks down the concourse once, then back. The answer comes automatically. He walked from the parking zone, through the doors, toward the arrival gates. Nothing else added. The word drops without warning. Balmer. It hangs there, heavier than it should be, pulling space around it. A stroller veers. Someone stops mid-step. A woman reaches for her phone and doesn't put it away. You fit the profile. The distance between them doesn't change. Less than 2 feet. No retreat. No call made. No hands raised in alarm. Just the word, sitting there, doing the work. He doesn't argue it. Doesn't deny it directly. His head tilts a fraction. If you believe that, he says, even, why are you standing this close? The answer comes fast from Officer Tyler Reynolds. Stay put. I'm running you. Exactly. His arms lift out to the side. Not all the way. Elbows bent. Shoulders set. He holds it, then widens it another inch, offering more than required. Search me. The command doesn't change. Don't move. He stays where he is. The motion freezes into something static. Uncomfortable but controlled. One screen stays raised in the crowd. If you think I'm a threat, he says, louder, not sharper. You need to check. The reply is a shrug, almost casual. Not yet. Time stretches. The radio crackles once at Reynolds' shoulder, then goes quiet again. He keeps his eyes forward. The muscles in his arms start to pull, a dull ache setting in. He doesn't lower them. Behind the glass wall, a plane rolls to a stop. He can see the jet bridge connecting, inch by inch. He checks the clock mounted above the corridor without turning his head. Stand still. I am... The words overlap slightly, neither yielding. Someone near the coffee kiosk speaks up. Tentative. He looks like... Back up. The crowd does. A half step at a time, as if unsure which direction is safer. The phones stay raised. He breathes in through his nose. out through his mouth. Slow. The small camera clipped to his belt is already recording. I need you to check my ID. He says, my supervisor just landed. The response is flat. Wait. The radio finally comes alive again. Voices bleeding through static. He catches his own name. Distorted. Then clearer. Active. Valid. No issues. The arm blocking his path drops. Not fully. Enough. Go. No apology. No explanation. Just the hand. Waving him off like an inconvenience that's finished being interesting. He lowers his arms. Blood rushes back into his hands. Pins and needles lighting up his fingers. He adjusts his jacket once, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there before. His eyes meet Reynolds's for a beat longer than necessary. You'll hear about this. He steps past. Not rushing. Not lingering. And heads toward the gate. Behind him. Reynolds's voice calls out. Sharp and final. Move along. The path stays blocked after the command. Marcus Hill stays where he is. Feet planted. Hands still visible. Officer Tyler Reynolds shifts his weight just enough to keep the path blocked. One shoulder angled toward the concourse. The other toward Marcus. The radio on his shoulder crackles once. Then goes quiet again. Don't move. I'm not... Neither position changes. Reynolds looks past him. Not at him. Scanning the flow of people, Marcus keeps his hands in the same position. The phones in the crowd stay raised. No one steps closer. Reynolds turns his head slightly and speaks into the radio. Voice flattened. Clipped. The description is short. A male. Suspicious. Waiting on a check. Nothing about the uniform. Nothing about the badge. Marcus hears his name come back wrong the first time. A syllable dropped. Then repeated. He doesn't correct it. He watches the departure board instead. The arrival he's waiting for is already marked landed. Stand still. I am... Reynolds glances at Marcus's hands. Then away again. As if checking a box he already plans to revisit. He takes a step to the side. Not enough to clear the path. Enough to force Marcus to adjust if he wants to pass. Marcus doesn't. A woman near the coffee kiosk shifts her bag higher on her shoulder. A man in a suit angles his phone, bringing both of them fully into frame. Someone mutters something Marcus doesn't catch. Reynolds catches it. Back up. The crowd does. A half step at a time. Like they're being measured. The circle widens but doesn't break. Marcus looks at the clock again. He doesn't say the time out loud. I need you to verify my ID. Wait. The radio crackles again. Static first, then a voice. Clearer this time. Reynolds turns his body slightly away, as if that will keep the sound contained. It doesn't. Active. Valid. Employed. The words carry farther than intended. Reynolds doesn't acknowledge it. He presses the radio back against his shoulder harder than necessary. Thumb lingering on the button a second too long. The stance holds. The block remains. Marcus doesn't move. He keeps his hands where they are, even though no one has asked him to anymore. The muscles in his shoulders tighten, then settle. From down the concourse, a small group comes into view. Suits first, then faces. One of them stops when he sees the crowd. His head turns. His pace changes. Officer. The voice cuts clean through the noise. Reynolds turns. Irritation already set before recognition has time to catch up. What? The man in the suit doesn't slow down. He closes the distance without raising his voice. Eyes fixed on Marcus. The look on his face shifts when he takes in the posture. The phones. The space between... What's going on here? Reynolds straightens, squaring his shoulders as if the stance alone will explain it. Procedure? Marcus lowers his arms. No one tells him to. He does it anyway. Carefully. Hands returning to his sides. He doesn't step forward. The radio speaks again. Louder now. As if compensating for being ignored the first time. The confirmation repeats. Clear. Good to release. Reynolds exhales through his nose. He steps aside just enough to open a narrow path. Palm flicking once in a dismissive arc. Go. Marcus doesn't go immediately. He adjusts his jacket, smooths the front, and checks that the camera at his belt is still in place. Then he looks at Reynolds. Just long enough to make sure the moment is shared. You'll hear about this. He steps through the gap, joining the man in the suit without a word. They walk away together. Pace steady, not hurried. Behind them, the circle dissolves unevenly. Phones lower. Conversations restart in fragments. Reynolds stays where he is, eyes following them for a beat longer than necessary. Then he turns back to the concourse, voice already rising towards someone else. Move along. They don't talk on the walkout. Marcus Hill keeps the same pace, matching the man beside him without looking over. The noise of the terminal thins as they move away from the gates. Shoes on tile. Wheels on concrete. The automatic doors open and close behind them with the same timing they always have. At the curb, the government vehicle is still where it was left. The placard remains on the dashboard. Unchanged. Marcus unlocks the door. Pause. Then reaches down to the camera at his belt. He doesn't turn it off yet. He waits until both doors are closed and the engine is running. Inside the car, the silence holds for several seconds. I'm filing a complaint before we leave airport property. Everything is recorded. That's all that's said. No recap. No reaction. The car pulls away from the curb and merges into traffic. The airport falls behind them in pieces. The drop-off lanes. The signage. The last glimpse of the terminal glass. Marcus checks the mirrors once. Then focuses on the road. The camera stays on until they're clear of the perimeter. Later, in an office with the blinds half drawn, the footage plays on a large screen. No sound at first. Just movement. The walk from the parking zone. The stop. The distance that never changes. The lack of urgency contradicts the accusation. The audio comes on. The word lands again. Exactly as it did in the terminal. Not louder. Not softer. The same. The clip pauses just before the approach. The microphone catches something it wasn't meant to. A muttered line. Half under the breath. Still clear enough to isolate. The room stays quiet. That's sufficient. The video resumes. The refusal to search. The instruction to wait. The radio confirmation arrives after the hold is already in place. The release without apology. No one comments on tone. No one describes intent. The sequence speaks for itself. A complaint is filed the same week. The language is narrow. Dates. Times. Location. Detention without probable cause. Failure to act on stated threat. Use of terrorism language without corresponding safety protocol. The response from the city comes back measured. Policy cited. Officer actions are described as vigilant. A sentence about cooperation. The footage is attached again. It doesn't change the facts, but it fixes them in order. The footage is released through counsel with a time-stamped filing. The clip circulates without commentary. Inside the department, the review starts quietly. Training files pulled. Prior complaints checked. Additional complaints are logged under the same name. The offer arrives by email. 100,000. No admission. Mandatory retraining. Marcus reads it once, then forwards it without comment. The reply is short. No. The number moves. The language tightens. Conditions are added. Conditions are rejected. The record expands. The footage stays the same length. When mediation finally happens, the room is smaller than expected. A table. A screen. Folders stacked neatly in front of each seat. The officer sits at the far end. Hands folded. Eyes down. He doesn't look up when the video plays. He doesn't speak when it ends. The final figure is read aloud. $845,000. The agreement includes termination. The footage was placed in the permanent record. No return to duty in that jurisdiction. Marcus signs where indicated. The pen leaves a clean line. He doesn't pause afterward. Outside. The day continues the way days usually do. Traffic. Appointments. Messages that stack up and get cleared. The check arrives weeks later. Heavier than expected. Sealed inside an envelope that doesn't explain anything. He doesn't frame it. He deposits it and closes the tab. The following Monday, he's back at work. Same vehicle. Same parking zone. Same doors. The placard goes back on the dashboard at the same angle. The camera clips into place out of habit, even when no one has asked for it. Inside the terminal, the flow looks unchanged. Different faces. Same paths. A few nods this time. Nothing else. At the gate, he stops and waits. The record exists now. Stored. Logged. Accessible. It doesn't undo what happened. It only limits what can happen next. This record is available for review under the standard retention policy. Power abuse stories documents incidents where authority operates before verification. Footage. Filings. And outcomes are archived by case. Watch closely. Notice the order. The record is the difference.